Greetings, people of the world, members of the universe, and lovers of astrology, classical Vedic astrology. Unfortunately, when we say Vedic astrology, people think that it means sidereal zodiac. So here's a link you can follow in the live chat. If you want to learn more about that. Okay, enough of that. So there's a lot of breakthroughs this week regarding the houses and Dashas system. So the biggest breakthrough was that I was thinking, hey, look, all these rules are in one chapter. It's pretty unlikely that they're not all about the same thing. So why am I splitting the first 6 rules to be about a house, and then the next bunch of rules, the first 6 verses are about houses evaluation, and then the next bunch of texts are about evaluating the houses per Dasha. In what way does that make sense? I asked myself this week. Because, first of all, the thing I just mentioned, they're both in the same chapter. There's no indication that these things are supposed to be taken separately. And then what is the basic theory of interpreting a Dasha? Just like basic Dasha 101 is what you see in the chart. You put onto a timeline using the Dasha system. So even though texts 1 through 6 are not really explicitly about Dasha, they're about the house, right? But what is Dasha of houses except for putting the house effects on a timeline? So therefore, the breakthrough this week is incorporating text 1 through 6 into the Dasha evaluation with very nice effects. So I want to review those rules and show you what they actually mean. I forget what dream this was or daydream, but somewhere recently I was explaining the difference between old books and new books, Phaladipika being a book from 14th century. The difference is really literacy was inherited in the old days, so that you not only received information from a book, you received it from a person that was expert in the subject of the book. At some time, as history progresses, people thought that it's better for everybody to be directly literate. But the intellectual quality of the world has actually gone down, as evidenced by the direct literacy of YouTube. Now, not only can everybody read a book, everybody can write a book, or publish a statement, or post something. And look at what wonderful things that did for the intellectual quality of the world. Of course, intellectuals can use it also. So there is good content. But there's a whole lot of junk. Anyway, the old books were written for experts. And the other interesting thing about the old books is that there weren't many copies of them. And that they're heavy. Books are heavy. So, especially Sanskrit books were written to be memorized. Yes, indeed. And you might think, how can you memorize a book? How many songs do you know the lyrics of? A lot, right? So the way that important Sanskrit books tend to be written in poetic meters, like song lyrics. So that it makes them very easy to memorize. But the effect of that is when we read them today, we'll see a lot of things that are not ordered the way that we would order them writing a book today, because they're ordered to fit the words into the lyrics, the meters and the beats. We see a lot of things might be repeated because you're reciting a book rather than having notes on a piece of paper. So very important things you want to repeat. Or it's conversational. It's spoken, so things that have to be remembered have to be repeated. You can't just put them in bold text. And then the thing about it being for an expert is that a lot of things are not explained. They're just stated, because the expert already knows the explanation. So, if we look at texts 1 through 6 of chapter 15 of Phaladipika, you find a lot of these dynamics at work. If you sort out what the actual rules are from the texts, it's a lot shorter than the amount of actual words used. And also there's a certain class of old text called sutra, which does this intentionally, minification. It does minification of the code. So anyway, let's take a look at Phaladipika. Is not a sutra, so it's not minified. Thank God. Jaimini Sutra is minified, hence quite difficult to read. All right, so what are the rules in 1 to 6? Let's review that. First of all, I also want to bring in text 16 and 17, because text 3, 16, and 17 kind of go together. And what they teach us how to do is how to score something. The rules will say something like, if the lord of this house influences the house, it's good. It brings shupala, great results for the house. So what text 3, 16, and 17 is saying, how do you evaluate how good it is? How much influence is there? And the rule from that is, whatever your point system is, you decide on what the point is. Let's just say it's worth 1 point. Or you may want to say, well, this is more important than other rules, so this is worth 2 points or 4 points, whatever. You have to decide that out. But whatever your point is, you multiply it by percentages of things. So, for example, the rule 16 and 17 is talking about Bhava Sandhi versus Bhava Cusp. So you take the percentage of a conjunction with a point, not just whether it is or it isn't aspecting, or is or it isn't conjunction, but how much of the aspect is there. And you reduce the full point by that amount, by the missing amount. And then he says you also should factor either the dignity or the bala, shadbala, or the type of relationship that the 2 points have, like friends or enemies, to reduce the point further. And you should also factor in combustion. If a planet is completely combust, then all of its points are removed. If a planet is not combust at all, then it keeps all of its points. Okay. So that's rules 3 through 3, 16, and 17. They give you a system. Let me show you. I can show you on the screen kind of a slightly written version of this. Let's see where it is. Who is this going crazy over here? Giving my own opinion. Okay, me Dasha report. I want to show you this. Where is it? I will add it. Okay, the cosmetic surgery is completed. So, here you see this. The rules from Phaladipika chapter 15, text. This uses rules from Phaladipika chapter 15, text 1 through 5, and 16 through 17 for sign evaluation. So that's another point before we get sidetracked. Let's talk about text 3, 16, 17. Leads to the following scoring formula. You take your base point and whatever weighting you want to give to this rule. So you'll get a big number with that, like 4, 2, or whatever. Then you multiply it by the percent of the aspect or conjunction, and the percent of either the dignity, power, or friendship, and then the percent of the combustion. So for example, in this chart here, you'll want to evaluate a rule that the Lord of the house influencing the house is beneficial for the house, right? So for this chart, you want to say how much is Saturn influencing Capricorn. So what you'll do is, you have the chart, so you'll say the aspects of the first house from Saturn is 57%, right? Because it's almost exactly trine. So that's what this 57 is here. It's the percentage of the aspect. So this is taking into account the rule from text 16 about Bhavsandhi. How much is it actually aspecting the cusp? And then it's the percent of the dignity. This is the overall dignity. Oh, that's another thing which was big progress this week, was I updated the dignity calculation to be exactly the Phaladipika. Not a hybrid of texts or not other texts, but exactly Phaladipika. So D60 is done by auspicious or inauspicious degrees. D30 Trimsha, D3. Those are done by friendships to the Lord. And Hora is done by its own special system. So this would be Saturn's dignity. So it's in a friend sign, right? It's this Saturn here, it's in Taurus. And Venus is, it's in a friend sign. Oh, this dignity of Saturn is Varga Vimshokpak over Dash Varga, over the 10 Vargas. So it's not going to be obvious from just looking at this one chart what it is. I will give a detail about that. I was about to do that before I realized it was already time to do this live stream. So that's Saturn's dignity comes out to be 60% of maximum. So you would reduce 40% from the points that it can possibly give. And the combustion, it has no combustion, right? So it keeps its full point. So the amount of influence of Saturn on Capricorn, if the rule is worth 2 points and it has double weight, is 1.368. That's how you work out the scoring rules in text 3, 16, and 17. The other rules, let's talk about those. So this leaves text 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 4, and 5. 1, 2, 4, and 5. 6 is like a summary statement of 1 through 5, and it adds a little bit of something else. Let me tell you what. Jonathan wants to know about D16. So D16, the way it's written in Phaladipika is a little confusing, but if you reference Parashara or Horashastra, then what Mantreshwar is saying in Phaladipika is readable now, because he says, I'm explaining what Parashara said. So if you see what he's referring to from Parashara, then you can understand what he means. So let me show you what he means. It's a very cool thing. It's a tangent, but it's a good tangent. Let me find the particular thing that we want. Oh, but so by the way, the book for part one, the publication of part one of translation of Phaladipika is also coming along at a pretty good pace, and I'll show you some. Now, what I'll show you are some of the diagrams from that book. So, it's this lovely thing covering my face. So you wanted to see 16, right? So this is what he's saying. 16 is actually quite a beautiful thing. Also, I've realized why we use the particular amshas that we use. It's actually not because of how the number divides into 30, because the seventh one we use, and that is a disgrace. Like 30 divided by 7 is a disgraceful number. It's not because of how cleanly the number divides. It's because of how well the signs or the symbolisms repeat, and what kind of a meaningful pattern the repetition of the signs or planets or whatever makes. In most of the cases, Shashyamsa maybe is an exception. So the interesting thing about Shodashamsa, this is what he's saying. He's saying Aries starts from Aries. Well, every cardinal sign will start from Aries. Every fixed sign will start from Leo, and every dual sign will start from Sagittarius. So that primary trine 159 is at the root of the Shodashamsa. Every cardinal sign is from the first sign Aries, every fixed sign is from the fifth sign Leo, and every dual sign starts from the dual cardinal, the dual trine. Yeah? It's kind of amazing if you divide it into 16. So it just proceeds in sequence then. So you have here, let me make sure you can see this. You have Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. all the way through. Of course, you're going to finish Pisces. If you have 16 divisions, you'll finish with 4 divisions left over. That's what we were getting confused about before, because he mentions 4 other things and there's 4 divisions left over, and it seems like we want to put those 4 things into those 4 spots. But because he somehow left it out, or I didn't pick it out from the Sanskrit or the typographical errors, obscured it, or whatever reason, it's not clear that he didn't make it clear about this. Cardinal signs start from themselves, fixed signs start from the fifth, where there's Parashara Dit. So anyway, you just continue going. You just continue going from Aries straight, like consecutive, like Navamsha, and it makes this pattern naturally. Then, because 16 is 4 times 4, and 4 is an important house, right? Like you have the first house is like the main chart, and then you have the Hora, it's similar to the second house, and then you have D3, it's similar to the third house, and then you have nothing for the fourth house. You go all the way to D7 after that. So how come there's this, the fourth house is missing? Where is it? I want a subchart that's something like the fourth house is an important house. Well, here it is. This is resonating on the principle of 4s. So in addition to, and one thing that Parashara did, which Mantreshwar didn't do, is what you see here for Shodashamsa, where there's deities, end signs or rulers. Mantreshwar mentions it only for the 16th, but Parashara mentions it for everyone. So, for example, he's got sages Narada, Agastya, and Durvas, I believe, for the Trimsha, for example. Or Pitris and Devas for the Hora, in addition to the other thing. But Mantreshwar only included that here on the 16th, probably because it's kind of important to show how this is actually a division into 4s. So if you take 4 times 4, you get 16. So if you take groups of 4 D16s, you get a D4. And the D4 is assigned to Devatas. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Surya, Surya, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Surya, Surya, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma. In order. Male signs go Brahma to Surya, and female signs go Surya to Brahma. So that's D16. That's the way that it is done. For the matters of dignity, you ignore the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Surya thing. But if you want to know, for example, what matters give peace or tranquility to this native and to the planet occupying this amsha, then you look at the Devata. Peace. Why peace? Because it's the 4th house, so tranquility, emotional calm, etc. So, say for example, the ascendant is at Aries. What would it be? What's 30 divided by 4? That's not an easy one either. 30 divided by 2 is 15, so 7.5. So let's say Aries is about 10 degrees rises. The native will be tranquilized by Vishnu. Feel peaceful with Vishnu. If it's a little bit more than that, then it's Shiva. If it's a little bit less, then it's Brahma. And what does it mean? Those are the gunas. And Surya is more like a mix of passion, Rajas and Tamas. So you have to know some of those things to be able to evaluate that. But that's enough for the sidetrack on that. But that was pretty important and interesting, right? Okay. So just to alert you to that what you see here with these deities assigned to amshas, it's not what would we say? It's not unique to the Shodashamsa. It's a principle that's in every amsha. But Mantreshwar only mentions it with the D16. So since he's summarizing or condensing the previous teachings according to himself in his opening statement in the book, there's probably something significant about this grouping this D16 into 4. And I think I explained what I think that is. Let's go back to where we were, which was where? These other rules. Texts 1 and 2, and 4 and 5. So let's just check and see what 6 is. Bardo asks, are harmonics useful for spotting the main theme in the chart? Do they work as... You'll see in the book. Harmonics in Vedic astrology, they're called the amshas or the vargas. And they're used in many interesting ways. You'll see this in the book, because he explained it in the 3rd chapter. Heck, I'll show you. I'll give you an advance view. This here is text 17 of chapter 15, where he gives the Karakas for the houses. But let's go back here to sign subdivisions. This is the manuscript. So he explains how you figure out each one of them. You know, what is it? What is the Dwadashamsa? What is the Sodrasamsa? What is the Trimshamsa? After explaining that, he gives the main usage of it, which is subdivision inclusive dignity. You use the subdivisions mainly to attain a much clearer picture of a planet's dignity. By considering all the dignities in all the subdivisions, we can resolve a very wide spectrum of dignity for any planet in any sign, depending on its degree and minute within the sign, which is what astrologers have observed, and why some simpler astrologers who aren't aware of these things complain about dignity. That it basically, in practice, it seems like a planet can operate with just about any kind of dignity in any kind of sign. So what is this whole dignity theory? Well, that's because of the subdivisionally inclusive dignity. That actually there is a very wide spectrum of dignity that a planet can have within any given sign, because of all the different subdivisions that it involves. So that's the primary way that classical astrologers use subdivisions, or you can call them harmonics. And then a lot of details have to be given about that. So he explains that not every division is equally impactful. There's a certain weighting to them. And how would you do dignity in something like a Draka or a Hora where there's no signs? So those are explained here in this bit. And then he goes on to talk about other related ways to use them, tailoring the favorable subdivisions to get these, like Parijatamsha, Uttamamsha, Gopuramsha, Simhangsananta, like that. Tally of unfavorable subdivisions, tally of benefic and malefic subdivisions. And then the other way that we're used to seeing the subdivisions is, like I was saying before, doesn't this subdivision have to do with such and such theme? Like, doesn't D2 have to do with stuff like the second house? Or doesn't D3 Trika have to do with stuff like the third house? So he says you can also use the lord of the subdivision. The subdivisions each have their own symbolic flavor and focus. The 3-part division, for example, is oriented towards describing our power and strength. The 9-part division is oriented towards describing our underlying self. The main division is oriented towards the practical surface level of things. We can use the specific focus of a subdivision to make specific interpretations. For example, if a planet's 3rd-part division lord is strong, then the person is like a king, stronger, wielding more power with what the planet represents. If the 9-part division lord is strong, the person is more in alignment with their self, and therefore happier in matters relating to what that planet signifies. If the main lord in the primary division is strong, the person has practical, tangible success with that planet. Like that, you can also use the subdivisions like that. And then he gives particulars for particular subdivisions. So that's that. So let's go back to these rules. And let's see what Rule 6 is about, because it's almost not really about much. Yeah. So what the most significant thing that D6 says is it introduces the concept of Karaka. And then in combination with that other verse that you got a sneak peek at, 17, he defines the Karaka. And then there's 2 other verses, maybe 20, 21, something like that, would tell you how to use the Karaka. So what is a Karaka means is somebody who does something. That's what Kara means. Kri. So in other words, it's a planet that acts on the same things that a particular house tends to represent. So yeah, I can show you that again. If we go back. Where are they? Where was that thing? 15, 16, it's 14 somewhere. My goodness. No, I lost it. 15, 16, 17. 18 through 20, and then the chapter is done. But it was just on the screen 2 seconds ago. I'm in the wrong chapter. Lol. Okay, here it is. So here, these are the Karakas, he explains. Mana mantri bhusuta saumya saumyo. Guru inatanayaro. Bhargavo bhanuputra. Dinakara devijejyo. Jiva bhanu gyamanda. Suraguru inasunu. Karakasyur vilagnat. So the sun, for example, is a karaka for the first house. It acts on the same things that the first house is about because sun is self. Jupiter is like the second house because it's supportive and growing. It grows things, it nourishes things, it holds, it helps things thrive. That's what the second house is. Mars, third house. Moon and Mercury, fourth house, what he says. So I guess he's merging intellectual function into the fourth house. Jupiter fifth. So he gives the list of Karakas. And then what the sixth rule says is that you should also consider its Karaka when evaluating a house. Now, how we do that, the way that I'm doing it, is twofold. Let me see what verse I'm basing my technique on. It says here somewhere. It says here somewhere. (17 and 20). Okay. Obtain the Karaka score by using text 3's rule on the Karaka, and also by taking the score of the house being evaluated using the Karaka's position as the Lagna. This is interesting. So, if I say, what text 6 said was, if you want to know how good the first house is, then score the sign that's in the first house, right? And then there was another text, I think, one of these other texts, I was a later one, like 8 or something, said also use the Chandra Lagna. So, sorry, in this particular chart, you would say the first house is Capricorn, mainly, and secondarily it's Gemini, because that's where the moon is. So your score for Capricorn, your score from Gemini combine somehow, and you get a score for the first house. But what text 6 is saying is also include the Karaka. So the first house's Karaka is the sun. So how do you include the sun in that? Well, you might just take the Bala and dignity of the sun and multiply that by a point, and you get some kind of influence, some kind of contribution from the Karaka. So I'll do that. I'm doing that in my calculations for this upcoming report. But the other thing which he's explaining in 17 and 20 is the bhava of the Karaka from the Karaka. So it's hard to show it with the sun, but let's say. So for the first house, in this chart that's on screen right now, Capricorn's score, Gemini's score, the sun's Bala and dignity, and Leo's score combine with the relative weights to give you the Shup or Ashup potential of the first house, to give you the good, auspicious or inauspicious results of the first house. If it's the second house, then you would use the score for Aquarius, because that's the second house from the Lagna, from the ascendant. Cancer, because that's the second house from the moon. Then Jupiter as the Karaka for the second house, so Jupiter's Bala and dignity. And the second sign from Jupiter, which is Scorpio. So to evaluate, to know this chart's goodness of the second house, you have to involve the score for Aquarius, the score for Cancer, the score for Scorpio, and the score for Jupiter. That's what text 6 is telling us to do. That's what the report is now doing. Okay, so that leaves us with rules 1, 2, 4, and 5 that are the actual rules for, like, when I say evaluate Aquarius or evaluate Cancer. What do you mean evaluate it? How do I evaluate it? The rules for that are in texts 1 and 2 and 4 and 5. So, what are those rules? Like I said, the books are written to be memorized, etc., etc. But when you boil down everything and translate everything to numbers, you get about 2 rules per text. So you end up with 8 rules. It's not actually 2 per text. Like the first text gives us 2 rules, the second text gives us 2 rules, the fourth text gives us 1, and the fifth text gives us 3. So the first rule from the first text is kind of the most important one. It's that good or bad influence in the house. Good or bad influence in the house. Let's show an example of that. Okay, this is already on the screen, so let's go back to here. Let's see how this Aries is evaluated. Okay, what is the good and the bad influence on Aries in this chart? Take a look at the chart now and think about it. Looks like Jupiter is probably doing good, but then Jupiter is the 12th lord. But actually the 12th sign from Aries is its own 9th house. So it looks like Jupiter is doing good things. For Aries, it doesn't look like much else is going on. Mars, the owner, has some amount. We have to calculate it of influence on Aries. Let's see what it actually evaluates on. So here I'm outputting how the rules are evaluated for Aries. See? So there's the first rule, good or bad influence in the house. It said the Lord Mars had 8% of an influence, a very minor, 8% times its whatever point, right? It wound up to be worth an 800th of a point. Jupiter, however, had a full point worth of plus to this house. Venus also wound up with a half a point. And then, so those were the benefics, right? The Lord, see, the L is Mars, and then B, the benefics are Jupiter and Venus. In this particular chart, the malefics are Sun, Rahu, Ketu, Moon, and Mercury. You might remember the rule for that, how you assess that. That was already previously given in Phaladipika. So Mercury is subtracting, because it's a malefic, so it's subtracting a third of a point. Sun is subtracting a tenth and a little more of a point. So the full total for good or bad influence on this is 1.25. Now the second rule is the good or the bad, same exact rule almost, except instead of for the house cusp, it's for the house lord. Good or bad influence on the house lord. So for Aries, that would be how much are good and bad planets, benefics and malefics, influencing Mars. It looks like it's just a bit from the Sun and from Jupiter. If you look at the chart, the Sun is doing a lot, right? It's very conjoined to Mars, but its Bala has to also be factored in. And from Jupiter, it looks like it's not doing too much, but also its Bala has to be factored in. Then the third and the fourth rules let me read you their source. The third and fourth rules come from the second text. Those two rules that we just looked at came from the first text. The third and fourth rules is the Lord in a Kendra or Kona relative to the house? That's a plus if it is. And are there benefics in the Kendra or Kona to this house? So for this house, for Aries, what did I do? So for Aries, is the Lord in a Kendra or a Kona to this house? It is. Can you see that? Can you see that it's in Leo? Whatever way that you manage to see things, like I've come to just like know where the triangles are because I've gotten used to this chart style. But maybe you can tell that they're both in fire signs. They're in the same element, so they must be in a trine to each other. However you can tell or not tell. You have to be able to spot trines, angles, and everything before you mess with these more complicated combinations of all that stuff. So you can see Mars is in Leo, and Leo is the fifth house from Aries. So the ruler of the sign is trine to it. That's a bonus. Does it have benefics in the Kendras or Konas? Just Jupiter. But Jupiter is it's at 28 degrees, and its cusp is at 25. So it's going to evaluate quite high. So it should have those two pluses. Let's go back and see what this is saying. Is the Lord in a relative Kendra or Kona? The report said, yeah. Mars is in Leo, which is the relative fifth house. So it's contributing a tenth of a point. It's because it's combust. Mars is combust. So the combustion is taking a lot away of what Mars can do for anything. And then does it have benefics in the relative Kendra Konas? The report says, oh yeah, it does. Jupiter is in Libra, and that's the seventh house from Aries, the relative seventh house. And it's very strongly aligned to the cusp, so it's contributing 1.15 points. Okay, so those are positive rules. Then the next set of rules the next rule comes from the fourth text. Remember, the third text was just about how you score anything. Then the fourth text gives a new rule. It says it's negative if there are malefics in the relative trines or in the dustanas. Relative dustanas. So looking at this for Aries, do you see a malefic in a relative dustana? There's Ketu in the relative sixth. Can you see that? Otherwise, not. There's Rahu in the relative 12th. Now you're asking, is Rahu and Ketu malefics? For this chart, they are. Then the other question is, do you have malefics in trines to this house? Well, you got Sun and Mars and Mercury, who's a malefic in this chart. You can see why now, because he's with these other malefics. So you've got three malefics trine, but one of those malefics is the house lord. And this is another principle, is that the house lord is never bad for the house. So Mars is not going to be included in this rule, but you have two. Sun and Mercury are both in the trine. So there's quite a few malefics that are trine to the fourth house. Let's see what that does to the scoring. You got Sun and Mercury. For some reason it ignored Rahu and Ketu. I'll want to check that, make sure it's supposed to do that. So Sun is subtracting that much and Mercury that much. Why is Mercury more than the Sun? Why is Mercury subtracting 0.6 and the Sun is only subtracting 0.4? Take a look at the chart. You should be able to see it by eye. without all the calculations. Mercury is at 25 degrees. That is literally where the Sputa, the Bhav Sputa is. The house cusp is exactly at 25 degrees. So Mercury has tremendous impact in this chart. Whereas the Sun is at 4 degrees. That's practically Bhav Sandhi. So this is what those texts 17 and 20, I think it's 17 and 20, 16 and 17, something like that, we're talking about with Bhav Sandhi. How it reduces the effect. Okay? So there you have almost all the rules. Then there's text 5. Text 5 actually gives us 2 more rules, but I am deriving or extracting 1 more from it. You'll see why when I tell you what the rules are. So the first rule is the Lord is in a relative Dustan, then it's negative. So let's show you that. Is there any place here where it has the Lord in a relative Dustan? So, for example, for Aries, the sun is the ruler is in its 5th house. For Taurus, the ruler is also in its 5th house. For Gemini, the ruler is in its 3rd house. It's not a Dustana. For Cancer, boop, 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 the Lord is in its relative 12th house. So for Cancer, it's going to take a hit because its Lord is in its relative Dustana. For Leo, the Lord is in the relative 1st. For Virgo, the Lord again is in the relative 12th. So Cancer and Virgo are taking subtractions from how good they are. Again, Libra, Lord is in the relative 12th. Scorpio, Lord is in the relative, 9th? No, 10th. Sagittarius, Lord is in the relative 11th. Capricorn, Lord is in the relative 5th. So it's just those 3. So it should be Cancer, Virgo, and Libra. Let's check it. So if we look for Cancer scoring, Lord is in a relative Dustan. Yay, the code report found it. Moon in Gemini is the relative 12th from Cancer. So it's subtracted almost a full point. And we said for Virgo too, Lord is in a relative Dustan. Mercury in Leo is the relative 12th. And Libra, Lord is in a relative Dustan. Venus in Virgo is the relative 12th from Libra. Bada boom. So that's that's the simple rule from text 5. The next rule that's in text 5 is just the inverse. The first part of the rule is if the Lord of this house is in a Dustan, and the second part is if the Lord of a Dustan is in this house. Not Dustan from the ascendant, that's for the first house, but Dustan rule relative to the house. So let's check and see if we find this rule operating. I'll show you the scores in a bit. So, can you spot any house here that has its own Dustan ruler in it? So you can just skip over any sign that doesn't have a planet in it, because it can't have its own Dustan ruler in it if it doesn't have anything in it. So we can skip Capricorn, we can skip Aquarius, we can skip Pisces because Rahu doesn't own anything. We can skip Aries. We cannot skip Taurus. Relative to Taurus, Saturn rules what? It rules 10 and 11, or 9 and 10. It rules 9 and 10. So it's a great ruler. So it's going to be the opposite rule. And that's the one rule that I derived personally from this. That wasn't explicitly mentioned in the text. The opposite of the thing, the trine rulers. If the trine ruler is in the house, it's good for the house. If Dustan ruler is in the house, it's bad for the house. If trine ruler is in the house, it's good. So this 5th house is good. Or it's getting a plus by the fact that it has its own 9th lord in it. Then we would go to Gemini. Gemini has the moon in it. Moon is its second lord, so that's okay. I mean, it's not good or bad. Cancer has nothing. Leo has its own lord in it. That's good. That's the lord of a trine in it, right? But it also has these two other planets, Mars and Mercurius. So it's also got Mars is the ruler of the 4th and the 9th. So it's also quite good. Mars is a good lord for this sign. To have Mars in Leo is good because it means it has the 9th. Leo has its own 9th lord in it. How about Mercury? Mercury is the second, and then it would probably make it the 11th, right? Mercury is the second and 11th from this. So that's kind of inconsequential for this rule. How about Virgo? So far we only found nothing. We didn't find anything with a D16, so let's keep going. Virgo, it has the lord of its second. And that's it. And Libra, it has the lord of its third. Libra has the lord of its 6th house in it. Jupiter. Do you see that? So finally we found it with the last example. Libra has Jupiter in it. Jupiter owns Pisces. Pisces is 6 signs from Libra. So the 6th lord of Libra is in Libra. That's going to deduct positivity from Libra. Let's see if this report caught it. Libra, relative D16 ruler in the house. It's Jupiter. So the report seems to be doing good. Did it pop up anywhere else? Relative D16 ruler. It shouldn't have popped up anywhere else. And it didn't. So I get a gold star. Let's see, are there other questions? Thank you, Maria. For you, I have all my rulers in the 5th or 10th, except one. I don't know what that means, but you'll find patterns like that. Like, well, looking at mine, you're finding a lot of 9th lord from a sign is in that sign. At 9 and 5, so you're finding a lot of trines. You find these patterns when you apply these rules systematically. That's the value. Just like you had, it's a pain in the neck to learn a new language, but once you learn a new language, you can talk to a whole million new people. Same way, it's a pain in the neck to do all this math and astrology and logic and thinking and analysis. But once this becomes natural to you, it opens this door to seeing a full spectrum of color, where before it was just static. So those are the rules that apply to the house. Now, what you do is, these rules actually apply to signs. So as you can see, I've evaluated first per the sign. Then what you do, eventually it will become for Dashas. For houses per Dasha, see? That will be the eventual output from all this work. Now what you could do, once you have the sign scored, like the total score for Pisces is -1 point something. The total score for Aquarius is 3.6. The total score for Capricorn, I like these big long numbers, they look cool. Total score for Capricorn, my dad makes fun of me when I put up these big long numbers. 3.3. Most of the numbers here are rounded to 2 digits, but for the total score, I didn't round it. So now that you have those total scores per sign, you can translate the signs to houses, because signs are houses. That's the beauty of the whole sign house system. Signs are houses. So it's just all you need to translate a sign to a house. All you need is a lagna or a reference point. So there's two important reference points. What are you seeing? Let me see. Yeah, but it's a little bit off to the side, isn't it? Sorry about that. Obviously, none of this is really formatted yet. I apologize for that. The two most important reference points for translating signs to houses are the ascendant, that's the most important one, and the moon, that's the secondary one. So see, here, you take the ascendant, and you give it a weight of 1, and then it says the first house from the ascendant is 3.33, and the second house is 3.6. Why is that? Look at the sign scores. Where's the ascendant? The ascendant, it's Capricorn. So look at Capricorn, 3.33. So Capricorn is the first house for the ascendant. And then Aquarius is the second house for the ascendant, 3.659. And hence you get these scores rounded. As for the ascendant, the first house is Capricorn's score, and the second house is Aquarius' score, and the third house is Pisces' score. But for the moon, the first house is 0.5. That's the weight. The first house is 1.17. So that should be half of Gemini's score because this moon is in Gemini. Why half? Because the weight of the moon's lagna relative to the ascendant lagna is half. So the second side should be Cancer, almost a 0. The third house from the moon should be Leo, again, almost a 0. So let's see if that's what it's doing. Find Gemini. Gemini's total score is 2.3. Half of that is 1.1. Cancer's total score is 0.01. Leo's total score is 0.08. Mercury's score, which should be the fourth house, is 2.01. So let's look and see what's going on with these house scores. That's it. That's half of Gemini's score, half of the Cancer score, half of Leo's score, half of Virgo's score. It worked. Another gold star. Then we talked about Karaka. Right? Also include a score related to the house's Karaka. Obtain the Karaka score by using text 3's rule on the Karaka, and also by taking the score of the house being evaluated using the Karaka's position as the lagna. So, yeah, I showed you what that was earlier. So that's what these scores are here. The Karaka's score is multiplied by a quarter, the Karaka's weight relative to the ascendant's weight. Then you do the total scores. Bardo, you asked about this. These are total scores for the houses in this chart, which is my chart. So it's hard to, I haven't done any work to visualize any of this stuff. I'm still in geek mode. Of course, when I present this, to the layperson, it's going to be highly visualized. But you can see fifth house is a spike, 12th house is a spike, 8th and 2nd are good, and 3rd house is a spike, 4th house is okay. This is not my... Yeah, the Pisces had a low score, but Pisces works out to be various houses for various things. The 3rd house for the ascendant, and it's like, I don't know what for the moon. I'm getting tired. So I want to also go on and show you. No, Pisces, let's see, what's Pisces the lowest score? It's a -1. No, Scorpio is the lowest score. It's almost -2. Libra also has a low score, -3. I'm not very liberal, am I? Or am I very mercantile? I won't cut the geek portion out of the report, but I will relegate it to that latch that you pull to make the hood pop up. So the mechanics can still find it, whereas the drivers don't have to be subjected to it if they don't want to. All right, everybody's letting Bardo monopolize. That's good. We like Bardo. Okay, I wanted to show you more. So that was my big revelation this week, was these rules from 1 to 6 are also relevant to the Dasha. So what am I going to do with these rules? It hasn't been done yet, but will be done first thing this coming week. This score here, which is for houses, will then be the baseline, which is modified by the rest of the rules. These might look familiar to you from last week's live stream. These are the rules after text 7. So instead of just giving this, whatever this sums up to for house 1, for the sun's dasha, it will be modified off the base score for house 1. So in other words, what that means without math and just in practical terms is, if you have a great first house, then but a shitty dasha for the first house, then you'll have kind of a weak first house experience during that crappy dasha. But if you have a crappy first house and a shitty dasha for the first house, then you'll have a terrible experience with the first house during that dasha. Do you understand? It depends on what the baseline is, because that's the basic principle for interpreting dashas, is you take what's in the chart and you put it onto a timeline by the dashas. Now, additional rules for the dashas and how the dasha lord is related to the house will apply. So you do those additional rules based on the baseline rules. That's what I'll be doing next. I still want to do a little bit more explanation, geek explanation, just to reveal the dignity calculation and to reveal the bala calculation, to put it up here on the page. I'm going to have to figure out also how to format this so that it doesn't print out as 953 pages or something. All right, so then after you have the baseline, you modify it with the other rules that are particular. What rules do we look at so far in our live streams? Let's review that. We looked at excuse me, I hope that didn't come over the microphone. We looked at the 6 rules from text 7. The dasha of the 8th lord from a house is difficult for the house. That's the first one. The dasha of the 8th draken lord from a house is difficult for the house. The dasha of a planet that's in the 6th, 7th, or 8th from a house is as difficult for that house as that planet is weak. That's the third rule. The 4th rule is the malefic in the Trishatru. This is kind of a new definition of a house grouping. You're not, maybe not so used to hearing this when you've heard of upachayas and you've heard about dustanas, but I seldom hear about Trishatru. But Mantreshwar has this categorization of Trishatru, the 3 houses of enemies. So it's 6, 12, and 3. 6, 12, and 3. 3 different kinds of enemies. One is just peers, siblings, rivals. That's 3. And then 12 is like weakeners of you, underminers of you, and 6 is like the opponents of you. So those 3 houses are called Trishatru, 3, 6, and 12. If you have a malefic in one of those places, it's good for that house. Because that's where you want to put your malefic energy, is on your enemies. So that was the 4th rule. If a sign has a malefic planet in its Trishatru house, then it's then that malefic planet benefits that sign's house during its Dasha. The fifth rule is if a benefic is in a trine or an angle to a sign, then that benefic's Dasha benefits that sign's house. And the sixth rule from text 7 is if a friend of the Lord of the house will benefit that house during its Dasha. Those were the 6 rules that we got from text 7. And then text 8, we got 3 rules from these that we already went over. The 3rd and the 6th Lord from a sign, they're part of the Trishatras, right? So 3rd and the 6th Lord, let them not influence us, because those are enemies. So if the 3rd or 6th Lord from a sign influences that sign, then as much as it influences it, then the Dasha of that 3rd or 6th Lord is difficult for the house of that sign. Then the second part of text 8 was a very complicated rule. There's a bunch of planets that should not conjoin the Lord of a house. Basically, they're the Malefics. They shouldn't conjoin the Lord of a house or its Navamsha Lord. If they do, then these planets are difficult for that house during their Dasha. What planets are they? The Malefics, Saturn and Mars, plus the Lord of Rahu. So in my case, Jupiter, because I have Rahu in Pisces. Or the Lord of the Dracon's 8th. The 8th Draco, the 22nd Dracon from any house cusp. The 3rd rule from the 8th text was if Rahu is in a house, Rahu might be bad for that house during its Dasha if he doesn't like the ruler. So I know we looked at all of those in the previous live streams. The new ones to mention real quick from the 9th text. If the first Lord occupies the house, now this rule is talking about, let's look at this rule, 15:9. Let's read it. (15:9). Bhavasyodayapa. Bhavasyodayapa shritasya kushalam yat pavanen odaya. Swami tishtati sanyuto pikalayat tad jatam palam. Dusthane viparitame taduditam bhaveshware durbale doshotiva bhavet balena sahite doshalpita jalpita. We did do this one. I remember joking about how cool that last cadence is. Doshalpita jalpita. Doshalpita jalpita. Bhavasyu Udayapa. So Udayapa specifically means the Lord of the Ascendant. So there's special rules for the Lord of the Ascendant. The Lord of the Ascendant is the first Lord and maintains that identity, even when relative to other houses. That's the special rule that's coming out here. What he's saying is that the house that the first Lord is always beneficial. So if the first Lord is sitting in a house, it benefits the house. It doesn't matter if it happens to be the 8th Lord to that house. It's still the first Lord of the Ascendant. And that takes precedence. It doesn't matter if it's a malefic, etc., etc., etc. The first Lord is always good. It's always good to be connected with the first Lord. Hence, the 9th rule is the 3 rules from this 9th text are that if the first Lord occupies the house, it is good. But I believe there might be a reverse condition on that. Let's look it up. 1591. I don't know if you want to get full geek and look at code. Where even is it? It's not 1591. It's 15. It is 1591. Hang on. Bardo, I don't know what planet you're on. Or you can... Yes. Jonathan, Rahu and Ketu are enemies. What is their relationship? It's going to be printed in this part 1. Here it is. You think you can see this now? If I'm not in the way, you can see it. Rahu and Ketu are enemies with this. Let's see. They have mutual relationships with everybody. In other words, there's no complicated relationships with Rahu, Ketu. They're all simple mutual relationships. The Sun, the Moon, and Jupiter are enemies. Mars should be an enemy because Mars is on that team. Mars is on the team of Jupiter and Sun and Moon. But they are neutral towards Mars because they like a malefic like Mars. It's friends with the other team, with the team that's antithetical to the Sun's team. Rahu and Ketu are friends with that team, so it's friends with Mercury, Venus, and Saturn. And that is the friendship and enmity of Rahu Ketu per Phaladipika. Phaladipika. Look, Horyu said something very... Hey, you know what I just said? Horyu just said something very interesting. I said, look, right? You know, you say look in Japanese? Hora. Hora. Horyu. Horyu said something good. So having a malefic rule the first house kind of helps. Because that's one less malefic to worry about affecting other planets. Yes. But also... people sometimes complain about what planets are assigned as being malefic and what planets are benefic. Let's talk about this for a second, because this is a slight diversion, but it's good. Let me clear the screen so you can concentrate on this. Classically speaking, there's a balance. Jupiter and Venus are benefic. Saturn and Mars are malefic. End of the story. But also classically, it's not just classically speaking, but simply speaking. Jupiter and Venus are basically benefic, are the benefics, and Saturn and Mars are the malefics, and that's your basic story. But what about all the other planets? They're somewhere in between. So in certain cases, they can go here or there. Sun tends to go malefic because Sun burns and it's hard and it's strict and it represents authority. So it tends to go malefic, which means tough and unforgiving. Mercury tends to go benefic. So now you have a kind of a balanced group as well, right? 3 malefics, 3 benefics, 3 that are somewhere else. Sure. The moon can go either way, and Rahu Ketu can probably go either way. But what way will they go? Well, the moon, if it's bright, it tends to go towards being benefic, and if it's dark, it tends to go towards being malefic. And Rahu and Ketu, they tend to go towards being malefic. This is the part that kind of throws it off. When you put Rahu and Ketu into the picture, it kind of throws things off, and there's too many malefics. So one approach is to say, that they're not malefic. It depends on, just like the other planets, it depends on what their lord is. If their lord is malefic, then they'll act malefic. If their lord is benefic, they'll act. That is one good solution to the problem. Mantreshwar didn't say that. I didn't hear him say that. But he said they're malefic. Bomb. But the thing that Horyu just brought up is, in the case where the first lord is a malefic, you subtract a malefic. You subtract a big old malefic. Either Saturn or Mars, one of the primary malefics. And so that does even out the score. So this is an interesting fact, that even something that balances something that appeared to be unbalanced. That's why I wanted to take that a couple of minutes there. What about the Lord of the Moon being a benefic? So yeah, you would do that. When you're evaluating the moon as the Lagna, then then this rule will apply to whatever is the moon's lord. Okay? But while you're evaluating a sign relative to Udaya, actually Udaya doesn't mean Lagna. So just rewind that. Let's start my answer over to Dawn. If somebody says Lagnesh, then it means something. And if somebody says Udayapati or Udayeshwar or Udayesh, it means something else. Usually they are synonymous, because usually the Lagna is the Udaya. So let's translate that into English. Lagna translates to focal, anchor, Lagnat, the thing that holds something down. Udaya translates to rising. So Udaya translates to ascendant. Generally, the ascendant is the Lagna, the focus. But it's quite possible to use a Karaka as a Lagna, as a focus, or to use some other planet as a Lagna, like the moon. To use the moon's position as the focus, the Lagna. But here in this text, he says the Udayapati, not the Lagnapati, the Udayapati. So it's the Lord of the Ascendant that attains this special quality, not the Lord of the Moon. Just my disclaimers, this is my live stream. So this is where we just talk, right? We're discussing. It's like a classroom. So what I'm sharing with you is not necessarily the truth, but it's the best that I have figured things out, or the way that I would best figure things out right now. If somebody comes along and gives me a better argument or a better logic, then I'll accept that. Or if I suddenly stumble on a better logic or argument, then I'll change that. But this kind of setting here, and even just me, the way we talk is just about, it's like science. This is the state of the research. Okay, so let us try to finish up. What were we talking about before Horyu's point? Let's see. I wanted to, finish these other rules, so you're up to speed with what I'm up to. So those are the rules up to the 9th text. Now I've also processed the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th. But these are much shorter. The 12th rule is a really very simple rule. Remember that one rule at the end of text 7, which was a very simple rule. Friends of the house lord are beneficial to that house during the Dasha. So the 12th text just has the opposite rule. For some reason, he waited until the text 12 to say it. It's a simple rule that enemies of a house lord are negative for that house during their Dasha. That's the 12th text. The 10th text was that the first lord is always beneficial. It's not really a rule unto itself, it just modifies the rest of the rules. That you should always exclude, and by first lord we mean as ascendant lord, lord of the ascendant. Lord of the ascendant is not going to harm anything because it's the lord that's trying to make everything prosperous. The 11th text had 2 rules. Yeah, but why? I'm just looking at my settings and I'm describing these settings as being neither positive nor negative. Let me see why. That was where we were before we started answering questions. So let's look up 50, and then I tempted you to go to geek mode with me. So let's do that. Let's go full geek. Now you are no longer in Kansas. You also require a magnifying glass. So this is the actual code that's processing these rules in the report. If we look at 9 per Lugna rules, the house occupied by the first lord flourishes. So there's a reason why this isn't an entirely positive rule, because there's one caveat in which it is not so great, and that is if it's in a Dustan. So the house that is occupied by the first lord will always flourish, but this is not good for the Dustan, because we don't want Dustans to flourish. We want Dustans to be tamed and put down and disciplined. We want them to be put under malefic energy. So that's the way this rule is balanced, positive and negative. It could create a positive effect or a negative effect. And then you also multiply this rule by the Bala of the Lord, which is an interesting thing. And I think we talked about this in the previous stream. It's up to the Lord of the house to benefit. Yeah, we actually did discuss this last week. It's up to the Lord of the house how much they will benefit from the first Lord's presence. If they're weak, then they don't take good advantage of the opportunity. So similarly, for rule... Wait, you guys are blowing up my DMs. The node conjunctions, I wouldn't say they're bad. We have to put that aside as a separate topic. Dr. Architect, what about the host of the Ascendant Lord? There's some rules that are involving the Ascendant Lord's Lord, and the Ascendant Lord's Ninth Lord, etc. Is the host of the Ascendant Lord also benefic, or is it inimical? It's going to gain some slight beneficiousness to it by the fact that it's connected to the First Lord. That's what this rule is all about. See, the rule was evaluating that. The strength of the Bala of the host of the First Lord is a determining factor in how much of the beneficence of the First Lord is able to be advantaged. Let's see where we are with 11th text says the mul trikona is always more significant than the own signs. Now, how is this put into practice? Oh, I see. Yeah, so your negative one means neither positive or negative. Planet gives the effect of the houses that it owns. Okay, so text 11 does have one very simple rule that was astonishingly overlooked up until this point. It's pretty obvious that the planet should give the effect of the houses that it owns during its dashas, right? So that's a simple rule that somehow was overlooked until sometimes we do that. We get into details and miss the simple things. That's what another thing about old books is they're not really always arranged in a pristine order because of the difficulty of editing, and also because they have other priorities. They want to make things memorable, they want to make things memorizable, and they want to fit things into patterns. Anyway, what is the mul trikona is more significant than the own sign. So let me find an example of where this is used. This will not be fine. Find it. There's 4 places. So, for example, the 8th Lord Dasha is bad. The first rule, right? If the 8th Lord is not the mul trikona of the planet, then it's not important. Let's flip over to something less gloriously geeked out. So I can show you this. You're saying, wait, I thought you said we were not going to geek. Okay, this now, it's funny how far you go in your Alice in Wonderland. This to most people on the planet is extreme geekery, but to us it's like, finally we're into something easy. So let's say the 8th Lord from a sign is bad for the sign. So look, the sun is the 8th Lord from the first house. So the sun's dasha should be bad for the first house. And that is the dasha of the mul trikona. So that rule will apply. Let's look for another. Let's say the second house, the 8th Lord is Mercury. Because Virgo is the 8th sign from Aquarius. So indeed, in Mercury's dasha, it's going to deduct points from the beneficence of that dasha for the second house topics. For the third sign, Pisces, its 8th Lord is Venus, because Libra is the 8th sign from Pisces. And Libra is Venus's mul trikona, primary domicile. Mul trikona means the primary domicile, primary base. So, indeed, Venus's dasha, on that rule, will subtract points from the beneficence of the third house during Venus's dasha. Aries, the 8th Lord is Mars, but it is not the mul trikona. The mul trikona is Aries. So Mars's dasha will not be detrimental to Aries. Furthermore, the ruler of the sign rule applies. So the rule of the sign cannot be detrimental to the sign. So there's 2 rules that are negating the idea that Mars's dasha will be difficult for the 4th house. For the 5th house, Taurus, the 8th Lord is Jupiter by Sagittarius. So that is mul trikona. So Jupiter's dasha should be difficult for 5th. Or you can't say that it will be difficult for the 5th house, but you can say this rule is deducting points, deducting beneficence from the nature of the 5th house experience during the Jupiter dasha. Okay, so it's like that. Just to do one more. So Gemini, the 8th Lord is Saturn. Capricorn is the 8th sign. But Saturn's primary domicile is Aquarius. The mul trikona is Aquarius. So actually for Gemini, Saturn is the 9th Lord, not the 8th Lord. So it will act like the 9th Lord, not the 8th Lord. On Trace Versus, sometimes people say it will be half the 8th Lord and full the 9th Lord. But basically just consider it the 9th Lord and forget the 8th Lord stuff. So you have 2 options in how you want to evaluate this rule. It either cuts down the non-mul trikona by half, or it just negates it. I think I'm doing negating. All right. Now you are up to speed with everything that I have learned and applied, ironed out, let's say, this week. And we will call it the end of the live stream there. Thank you, everybody, for joining me.